eight people aside
So sorry, I
from
just started recording.
yeah, of course. No, that's great. So aside from Lainey and myself, there are about eight more people. What I would love is really sort of blitzkrieg, if in 30 seconds, everybody can give a bit of not necessarily intro, but what they're interested in, because I think that would make this session that much more, I think, robust, and we can glean. You guys can hopefully glean some nice lessons that are applicable to wherever you are, whatever you are trying to do. And so I'd love it
Mm,
if everybody can go around for if Lainey thinks that's a good idea,
yeah.
30 seconds, and
Yeah.
just talk about what you want me to focus on in this session.
Totally. I think that's a great opportunity in a group this size. So, and I think everyone in this group is taking the Climate Farm School course either next week at Green Valley Farm and Mill in California, where I live, or in the Hudson Valley the following week. I did invite some of our alumni to join as well, and some of them couldn't be here but are excited to watch the recording. So, yeah, it just so happens this is a perfect intimate group of people actively on their regenerative ag learning journeys, and we will go around and introduce everyone and share what Taimur has requested. And I will start just kind of going around the room in the order I see you all with Ariana.
Sure. I mean, I'm really kind of in the mode of just soaking up as much information as possible right now and kind of hearing what I'm just curious about kind of different geological contexts um and what the solutions are. I think uh kind of longer term, I want to see I'm a software engineer and I would love to kind of hear like what people on the ground are dealing with, what their pain points are, and how my skills
Mm,
might be able to help.
amazing. Thank you. And where are you calling in from, Ariana?
From Oakland, right across the bay from San Francisco.
Nice. Okay, yeah, we'll just share where people are too, because that could be fun and interesting. Rebecca, over to you.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for spending your time with us, Taimur. I am in Fresno, California, so right in the valley, where for the past month or so it's been over 100 degrees pretty much every day. So my big interest right now is when you're starting a farm, kind of thinking from scratch. You've got this arid to semi-arid landscape. How do you green that kind of a space, and how do you choose climate appropriate
Mm,
crops to balance, the water needs while also improving the ecosystem or trying to return it to what it could have been. So that's
mm,
my big idea, and I would love to be part of a collective farm in this part of the state. So that's sort
mm.
of what I'm here for. So yeah, hopefully we can learn more.
Wow. Thank you. We'll go to Kate.
Hi there. I am in Colorado right now, and I have a supply chain background. So I think my area of interest is always like, how are you working on making things more efficient and, kind of within your farm and thinking about scaling. That's kind of where my mind always goes.
Mm, nice. Thanks, Kate. We'll go to Dagan.
Sure. Hi. My background is a little bit in food waste and a little bit in grain. So I worked for an organic grain company, and we sourced from organic regenerative farms. So that's sort of what started my journey into regenerative ag.
Mm,
Um, I'm at Climate Farm School to kind of like round out my understanding of the food systems. So what I'm curious to hear about today is like your personal experience on the farm, trials and tribulations, any like particular struggles, or I love the phrase pain points. Like that's why I'm here listening today.
Yeah.
mm, nice. Thanks, Dagan. Alana.
Hi, I'm calling in from the San Francisco area. I also work in food waste, but come from like a tech marketing background. And I joined Climate Farm School just also to kind of round out my entire understanding of the food system, but also looking generally about maybe a career shift and how I want to be continuing part of the food system and know so little about
Mm,
agriculture. So I just really love hearing people's experiences and yeah, learning all that.
lovely. Thank you. Heather.
Yes, hi everyone. Sorry I'm not on video, but nice to
No
see all
worries.
of you. I'm calling in from Bolinas today. And I work at a company that is bringing better for people, better for planet cooking oils to the market. And so really interested in learning more about what I can look for when talking to potential suppliers and farms, from just like understanding their practices better and making sure I understand what they're saying to me. And then also professionally, I just love growing food. I love good food. And so trying to just learn more ways that we can take better care of the planet and still make things that are delicious and then more nutritious also.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thanks, Heather. Kyle, you will round us out.
Hey everyone, hi Taimur. Thanks so much for presenting today. I'm calling in from San Francisco. I am the co-director of Soil Centric, which our organization is working to bring more people into regenerative agriculture and ecosystem restoration and make sure that they can fit into a program or fit into the educational pathway that is the most kind of correct for what they're interested in. And we've been familiar with Climate Farm School and Lainey and Ryan's work for some time now. And so I'm just super stoked to get my hands dirty with their program and yeah, just have firsthand experience with it.
Amazing. Thank you all.
That's excellent. Wonderful. Firstly, thank you to everybody for being here. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate you all taking the time out from your hectic schedules, and of course for being interested in regenerative agriculture, which of course both Lainey and I are more than happy to spread the gospel of because we firmly believe that it is one of the best solutions to climate change. And I just love the name of the Climate Farm School, just like, Lainey very graciously mentioned that she enjoyed the name that we chose for our farming operation, which was, of course, an homage to Project Drawdown, which was a book, really impregnated with a lot of hope. And when I read that pretty much soon after it came out and hit the bookshelves, I just fell in love because, the climate crisis is not just a story of, extreme depression. And there's a lot of hope in there. There can be a lot of climate optimism because we now have so many solutions at our disposal that we just didn't even have like 10 years ago. And, I was listening to Bill Gates' interview with Bloomberg just like 3 days ago or 4 days ago. And he talked about this when the Paris Agreement was signed. So many more technologies have come into play now that allow us to do things in a much better way. And of course, I'm not some sort of dewy-eyed fan of everything that Bill Gates does or anybody does. We all have our foibles. And I don't think that he understands the power of nature as much. So, of course, he's very pro-science, but I think there are many different sciences. He's much more of stuff that is, I guess, patentable in many ways, whereas, which, of course, has its positives as well. And we can get into the weeds of some of that stuff. What does that mean in the agricultural sphere? For example, he's very pro fertilizers. He's invested in some of the biggest fertilizer makers in the world. Are fertilizers good? Are they bad? Are they necessary? His thesis and view is that Africa, where you have a huge, in some countries you have a stunting and malnutrition crisis. You definitely have a huge food security crisis pretty much all throughout the continent. And his entire thesis is that without fertilizers, you cannot enhance the yields of that continent. Now, is that true? Is that not true? And is that true for other parts of the world? And I think that's something I'd also like to cover in today's chat. I'm really happy that this is a very intimate sort of chat. And I'm very happy that we all shared, each of you shared where you're coming from and sort of what you kind of want to get out of today's session. And I'll give you, the first few minutes, I'll talk a little bit about our journey, how I got to doing what I'm doing. And along the way, sort of what have been the challenges, the pain points. Have we been able to overcome these challenges and pain points? In many cases, yes, some of them still remain. What are we doing about that? What's our strategy going forward? All of those things. How do we farm? And then specifically, I'd like to get into more nuances around some of the questions that were raised in the intros and some of the things that people want, some of the information that people are craving. And hopefully I'll be able to give somewhat satisfactory answers or information about those topics. So let's begin with my own journey. I did not start in farming. I do not have any farming background. at all in my family. We are essentially city slickers and have been for many generations. I went to university in a city. I went to Columbia University, was fortunate to attend that for undergrad. In New York, again, in a city. I worked on Wall Street and finance, again, in the city of New York. So I was very much, my life has been spent in cities. And then when I left finance, because I didn't feel as fulfilled, deep down in my soul, it wasn't as soulful. And finance has changed a lot. Today, there are parts of finance that one could, if one wanted to try to pivot to. There's a lot of focus on impact, ESG, and other things like, there's biodiversity bonds. Like these were things unthinkable in, circa 2011, 12, 13, etc. When I was in Wall Street. And so, in 2015, I was blessed with so I got married 2014, 2015, we were blessed with our first kid. And, that was a pretty big, it was obviously a big life altering moment for everybody. But in many ways, it was a philosophical change that, I felt on a deep level. What is the state of the world and planet that my child has been brought into, right? And of course, I was always sort of a public, a more sort of aware type of an individual who read about things like policy and public goods. Obviously, was always in favor of public goods, doing the right thing, good governance, those types of issues. But I had never really looked into the environment much, and definitely not climate change. And it's ironic, having gone to Columbia University, where you have people like Dr. Jeffrey Sachs and the Earth Institute. And, throughout my time there from 2007 to 2011, climate change was not a front and center conversation at all. In fact, if it ever did come up, it was in the context of, this is something that our grandchildren or great-grandchildren might have to deal with, not as a here and now problem. But in 2015, before my son was born, but we were still expecting, I stumbled across a couple of articles on climate change. And then I sort of have this habit of going to rabbit holes, which I did. I read a few books on it, including Earth by Bill McKibben, excellent book, EAARTH. But basically, Bill McKibben says that the planet that I was born in is not the planet that we are in right now, because we are way beyond the safe threshold, which is 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide, which today, by the way, we are now over 415 parts per million, which is, incredibly dangerous. And so even when I read this in 2015, we were well past 350, we crossed 400 essentially, and we were in uncharted waters. And that really shifted my perspective. And there were a lot of, pretty nasty events that I had sort of witnessed in my early adulthood, which were all linked to climate change. And nobody had ever informed us. Now, of course, we have this really good climate attribution science, which is much better. And, newspapers report stuff, this heat wave or that flood or that hurricane or that drought is related to climate change and X times likelier because of climate change, etc. But there was no attribution happening to the 2010 floods that happened in Pakistan, which caused 20 million people to lose their homes, right? There was no climate attribution happening to the Arab Spring, which was indirectly linked to climate change because the wildfires and drought that happened in Russia and the Ukraine in 2010, which actually led to an export ban from Russia on wheat, and Russia and Ukraine, as we now know, because of the current crisis and war in the Ukraine. But, these parts of the world with their black dirt soils are big producers of commodity grain, which helps stabilize grain prices all over the world. And there are many countries that are net importers, including most Arab countries, right, including Egypt. And so the Arab Spring that happened in Egypt and the protests in Tahrir Square was because wheat prices went through the roof that year, and the Egyptian government, which used to subsidize bread, stopped doing that. And so the people just, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so people really en masse erupted at Tahrir Square, wanting the government to essentially resign. And the Syrian civil war also had its roots in climate change, because 2006 to 2010, Syria had the worst drought in its recorded history, which meant that I think 60% of crops failed and 80% livestock died, and 2 million farmers destitute farmers moved to the cities where there were no jobs, nothing for them. And so these are the people who started protesting first. And then, of course, an authoritarian government tried to crush them, but they had nothing to lose. So they protested even more. And then the entire country ultimately sort of combusted into a civil war. So climate change was really dangerous. And the reason I've gone into this detail is because knowing these facts really had a huge impact on me. And I was like, does it even make sense that we're bringing this child to this planet, and it doesn't seem to make any sense at all. So I was in a pretty sort of grim mental framework at the time. And then, after the baby was born, we decided to, we needed the help of the grandparents. And both Farah's parents were in Lahore, and my mom was as well. So we moved there. And I took up the reins of textile spinning mill. And as I did that, soon after the mill actually shut down. And the reason it shut down was because cotton prices went through the roof. And spinning, by the way, is the process of making thread. So this was a coarse count thread making mill. And that coarse count thread is used in things like denim, towels, stuff like that, right? So not like super fine, but coarse count thread. And so, cotton was one of the main sort of expenses. So this is a high volume, very low margin business. And if any of the component costs go up even slightly, the entire business model can collapse. And that's what happened when cotton prices went through the roof. The mill had to shut down for a bit. And a lot of people, like 2,000 people, essentially lost their jobs. And this was very, it was grim. A lot of other mills were shutting down. So hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs because 1/3 of Pakistan's cotton crop that year got destroyed. And I started, I was very perturbed by this. So I wanted to do a deep dive into why this was, and was there a way to prevent this? And the reason this happened is because the 1/3 of this cotton crop got destroyed was because the pink bollworm, which is a pernicious pest of cotton, that year the pink bollworm was especially destructive. And the reason for that, most people just left it at that. Oh, it happened. We can't do anything about it. But I wanted to go deeper, and the reason that this happened, I realized as I went deeper or peeled the layers of the onion, was that Pakistan used a genetically modified cotton seed, which is what most cotton in the world is. It's called BT cotton. So the Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacteria, is inserted into the DNA of this cotton seed, and that's where the genetic modification happens in this case. And what happened was that in the first few years, it was very successful at keeping pests at bay. But ultimately, as what happens with biology and nature is that pests develop a resistance and they evolve, and that's exactly what happened. And so they came out with a bang, and that year 1/3 of the crop got decimated, which had lots of negative downstream impacts on the entire value chain, right? And so many millions of jobs are dependent on cotton value addition in many economies, including Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was very disturbed when I learned this as well. But then, I started thinking about, is there a better way to do agriculture? Some people in industry were talking about getting the latest GMO iteration of cotton seed called Bolgard 3, also by Monsanto, which was the latest BT cotton seed, whereas Pakistan was still using Bolgard 1. But I thought that also doesn't make sense, because ultimately nature and evolution always wins. We're seeing this with superweeds across the world, where, glyphosate isn't working anymore. So you have things like dicamba coming in, right? It's because a reductive approach just doesn't work. So then I started thinking about, are there alternative models to agriculture? Or are we doomed to do this and just coming up with newer, more expensive, more destructive, reductive solutions? And I realized through a lot of research that, yes, there are actually alternative models of agriculture. There's organic agriculture, which, again, you would think with the price tag of things in the grocery store in places like the US, is bound to lead to lower yields, which is why it's more expensive. But that's not necessarily always the case. And we have actually enough data from studies even to show this. The one study that I found was from the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, where 10 years after farmers had converted to certified organic, organic farmers next to their neighbors who were growing BT cotton. So the organic farmers were getting the same yields, but had much higher profitability. And this was, big aha moment for me, big light bulb moment that, oh, you can get the same yields with organic. So why isn't everyone going organic? And these guys were more profitable because they had lower expenses. And on top of that, they were also getting an organic premium. So they were just, getting, they had this bonanza going because they went organic, which was wonderful. And then I discovered the work of Professor Carlo Leifert in the UK, where he also shows through many studies that in many parts of the world, especially warmer parts, tropical, subtropical parts of the world, you can actually, by transitioning to organic, you can actually get a yield bump up to something like 33% or something, right? And that was like, again, big light bulb moment for me. And then I discovered the Rodale Institute's white paper that regenerative organic farming can sequester all the excess carbon that's in the atmosphere and put it in the soils, which is also amazing. Another big light bulb. And then this happened a bit later, but maybe a year after this point, the Drawdown, the book came out as well, which again, a lot of Drawdown solutions are actually related to agriculture directly or indirectly as well. Everything from no-till, composting, there's holistic or managed grazing is one of the solutions. So there are actually a lot of solutions in Drawdown that are linked to regenerative agriculture practices, right? And, so there was just a lot of hope that suddenly I was filled with at a time, as I mentioned, with this backdrop. I was otherwise in a pretty dark place in terms of, the climate crisis. And then, of course, I learned a little bit later about the biodiversity crisis as well, when that insect Armageddon study came out from Europe, which showed that Europe has lost, I think, 75% of its insect population in just the past 30 or 25 years. And that, again, was shocking in a place like Europe, which has really high regulations compared to the US, and definitely compared to developing countries and economies in Asia and Africa, where things are a lot more laissez-faire. And so, that was pretty stunning as well. But again, regen ag done right can be a solution to that crisis to a great extent as well. And so, there's only one problem. So I realized that what I want to do is regen ag. I want to take these newfangled ideas and practices and put them into the test, put them to practice. And there was only one tiny problem, which is that I didn't have any agricultural land because, as I mentioned, I was born an urbanite. And so with that teensy little problem, I started reaching out to people in my orbit who did have agricultural lands, including my father-in-law, who is otherwise a captain of industry, but has a passion or a hobby of his is agriculture. And so in southern Punjab, in the Thal Desert, he started buying lands on the cheap, starting in the early 1990s. And so he'd bought up a few pieces of farmland in that desert terrain. And as I was pitching to him, he sort of finally, after a few conversations, was like, all right, let's take one of these farms and let's see if these ideas, as you were saying, we could achieve higher yields, et cetera, if that pans out. So that's how, Drawdown Farm was born. And we took an existing farm and we started doing a bunch of different, drawdown, quote unquote, drawdown solutions there. And other, as I learned more and more about regen ag and its various tools and practices. So what I like to say is we do integrative regenerative agriculture, and because we've integrated a lot of different approaches, a lot of different practices, systemic practices, amendment practices, and we've tried to bring, that are appropriate for us and sort of brought them all together as much as is possible. And it's an ongoing journey and process. Every year we keep stacking more and more, practices. We also try to integrate technology wherever it makes sense, wherever we believe that it can enhance our productivity or our stewardship. So what does that mean? One example of that is high efficiency irrigation system. So at this point, about 90% or so of the farm is under high efficiency irrigation systems as opposed to flood irrigation, which is the norm. in Pakistan, India, and a lot of other parts of the world, but is extraordinarily wasteful, right? We waste so much water. So high efficiency irrigation systems on our farm means drip irrigation for our orchards and for some other specialty horticulture crops. It means center pivot irrigation systems, impact sprinkler irrigation systems, and also hose reel irrigation systems, right? So that has allowed us to dramatically reduce our water usage. And on top of that, we are working hard to build soil, which also further enhances the ability to hold soil, because our native quote unquote soil, which is not really soil at all, or dirt, is basically pure sand. Think beach sand. And it has zero nutrient holding capacity, zero water holding capacity, and it is extremely brittle in terms of temperature fluctuations. So when it gets really hot in the summers, it is very quick to heat up. And that obviously causes a lot of stress to plants, to the crops we're trying to grow. And similarly, in the winter, it gets really cold really quickly as well, right? And so it's not ideal. Unlike a perfect loamy soil, which has a perfect triumvirate of sand, silt, and clay, we don't have that, right? And so one way of changing that is having much higher amounts of organic matter in the soil, because organic matter will enhance the cation exchange capacity, which will enhance the ability to have, store water, store nutrients. Also, having organic matter means the soil has become living, which in turn means that it has copious amounts of biology in there, right? So there's a living soil food web in there. And that's really good as well, because we know that nutrient cycling is really important. We have a study from Ireland from 2022, from Ireland's best agriculture university, which is University of Dublin. And that study shows that if you have X amount of earthworms per square foot, then you have enough nutrient cycling happening that you can either completely eliminate the need for synthetic fertilizers or very, very dramatically reduce them, right? And those are the outcomes we want. And let me take this opportunity to also bifurcate regen ag into two components, right? You have regenerative agriculture, and then you have regenerative organic, and they're two separate things, right? Regenerative organic means you're using zero synthetic inputs, right? Zero stuff that OMRI would ban, right? Whereas regenerative agriculture means you are regenerating, but you're using some synthetic inputs. And of course, the goal of any good regenerative farm should be as you move down this path, you are able to dramatically reduce your need for synthetic inputs, ultimately, hopefully eliminating it, depending again on your context, on your soils. In super brittle conditions, super sandy soils, maybe you might never be able to eliminate inputs, but those inputs don't need to be inorganic, right? And we're going to get into another bifurcation, which is regenerative systems versus regenerative amendments. And that's something I'm a big advocate of, regenerative amendments. I think a lot of the regen ag movement is very heavily focused on the regenerative systems, which I'm obviously a major advocate of as well. But I think you cannot ignore the regenerative amendments, right? So some of these amendments can be farm made, whether it's different types of composts and vermicomposts, whether it's different types of fermented nutrients, whether it's things like algae, right, which is a very good source of nutrients. So you can have an operation which is growing algae. We're doing some experiments on that. Whether it's making biostimulants on the farm. So we do that with moringa leaf extract, with aloe vera leaf extract. Well, we've planted aloe vera recently, so we haven't made our first batch, but the idea is to make our own biostimulant, with aloe vera as well. So there are many things that farmers can make on a farm in situ, depending on their context, what is available to them. But then there are also amendments that can be purchased. And I am not opposed to purchasing amendments that fit in with a regenerative system, that are good for biology, that enhance photosynthetic efficiency of a plant, and therefore enhance biology. Because how is soil created? It's not, there's also this, I think, idea, which is healthy soil makes healthy plants, which makes healthy humans and animals who consume that. And that's true, but it is a bit inverse because the healthy soil in the first place got there because of plants. It is plants that are the drivers and makers of soil. And so when you have really healthy plants, they do a lot more photosynthesis, which means, they're growing more, they'll have higher yields of the grain or the fruit or whatever it is you're growing, or the biomass. But that higher photosynthesis is leading only partially to an enhancement of biomass or yield. A lot of that enhanced photosynthesis means more root exudates, which basically means a much faster buildup of soil, because the root exudates are feeding different bacteria and fungi, and everything is eating each other. And then you have, nematodes and archaea and protozoas, and then microarthropods, and then earthworms, which also eat bacteria. So you have this huge soil food web that builds up. And it all starts with root exudates. The more root exudates there are, the quicker everything grows. And the more you have of one thing and then other things, the quicker you have soil, because this organic matter is built up of detritus, which is like dead, basically microbial life, and also the manure of the microbial manure, right? Because everything that eats needs to poop, and that's really bioavailable forms of nutrients as well, right? But it all comes down from the root exudates. And here I want to add, and we can get into more granular details. I'm sure you will all have a bunch of questions about this as well, right? If a nutrient is not, somebody mentioned the geological profile. So if a nutrient is not available in your geological profile, and sandy soils generally are very weak in having certain nutrients, if it's not there, you can enhance all the biology you want. You can have amazing microbial inoculants you're adding, compost extracts, compost teas, etc., which are all amazing. But they will enhance the nutrient cycling of what is in the system, but they cannot, bring in stuff that's not there. So you have to add the stuff that's not there. If cobalt or manganese, which are essential enzyme cofactors towards a bunch of enzymatic reactions, and that's true for the human body and the animal body and for plants, we are all a bunch of enzymatic reactions that are continuously happening in our body, right? Until the time we are alive. And those enzymatic reactions are keeping us alive. And in fact, one of the reasons why old age happens is because a lot of these enzymatic reactions or sickness and disease happens is because either those enzymatic reactions slow down, or in many cases are not happening because you have missing enzyme cofactors. And whether that's, a lot of people have magnesium deficiencies, a lot of humans have omega deficiencies, omega-3 deficiencies, and or iodine deficiencies, and that has huge ramifications on their health. Somebody I know recently discovered that they have an iodine deficiency. They did a urine test and they started taking a dulse extract. So it's an organic iodine supplement from the seaweed called dulse. And lo and behold, within a couple of days, they had a bunch of aches and pains happening in their body, and they significantly, all of that got reduced, right? And plants are the same way. They need enzyme cofactors to be able to make complete proteins, for example, right? You need molybdenum and sulfur to make complete proteins. So you take that nitrogen, whether it's in the form of ammonia or nitrate, and you make amino acids and then complete proteins. But making those sort of chains of peptides requires enzyme cofactors, without which you cannot do complete proteins. And a lot of the pest and disease pressures we have in the world are because plants are not optimally healthy, and you need to do both things, all hands on deck to get the quickest and best results, which is regenerative amendments, both farm-made ones, but also strategically purchased ones, because, a farm is not going to have a deposit of cobalt, obviously, for example, or manganese, right? So there are farmers, for example, in Australia who buy like raw material, and then they do a fermentation process using lactobacillus bacteria, which makes those raw nutrients much more bioavailable, and then they microdose them either into the soil or via foliar applications, right? Foliar, by the way, is anything you apply on the leaf surface. And they're getting really good results. They have been able to dramatically reduce the need for, bought synthetic inputs, right? Aside from certain raw materials, as I mentioned, that they're buying. So that's really useful. And so, you know, and yeah, just to give you a little bit of background about our farm, I don't think I spoke about what the farm is, what it does, what it grows, and where we hope to go. So we are a 600-acre farm, as I mentioned, in the Thal Desert of southern Punjab in Pakistan. And it's obviously very hot. Temperatures can reach about 50 degrees Celsius in peak heat, which is about 120 or just a smidge above 120 Fahrenheit. So as you can imagine, it can get quite boiling in the peak months of the summer. We get some rains in the monsoon, and some years we do, some years we don't, because climate change has made everything so erratic. We also get a fair amount of cold weather in the winters. The winters aren't long, but they can get quite cold, nearing zero. So you get frost, which is, again, not great for plants. We have a very mixed cropping system. We grow orchard crops, mango, citrus, sweet lime. We grow certain specialty horticulture crops, such as dried red chilies. We grow bananas. For the first time in history, bananas were made successful in the Thal Desert, and having an amazing fungally dominant compost was a big part of how we made it successful. Our sister farm also tried it. They're completely conventional, and they failed. Within a few months, the plants died. But having lots of organic matter allowed the plants to really survive in these otherwise very challenging circumstances. What else? Yeah, we, for the first time in history of the Thal Desert, we grew ginger, which is otherwise a crop grown under the canopies of forests. So we grew them under these sort of hoop houses or tunnels with a black shade cloth, but we added lots of fungally dominant compost. And you could see, the earthworms love it. We saw so many earthworm castings come up. These are soil-based earthworms. We grow silage maize. We have an animal operation with cows, sheep, and goats. We grow some fodder crops. We have a grazing zone where we do holistic plant grazing or managed grazing. We grow sugarcane, which is one of the primary row crops that we grow. And we, this year, for the first time, did some large-scale experiments on intercropping with sugarcane. And we did a sunflower experiment, which was very successful. With using the same amount of water, essentially under a center pivot, we were able to also get a really good sunflower yield. And so the gross margins on that crop were fantastic, because you're using a lot of the same resources to grow another crop. And Pakistan is a chronically deficient country in oil, culinary sort of food oil, basically edible oil, and it imports a lot of palm oil. It imports soy, and it's chronically deficient. Obviously, the country grows some mustard and some sunflower, but it's not nearly enough for a country of 240 million people, and it's a huge expense. Also, the country has a balance of payment crisis that it's facing. The imports are higher by a fair amount than the exports, so you have a balance of payment crisis. And I did some back of the envelope calculations. If farmers would all the sugarcane acreage in Pakistan was doing intercropping with sunflower, we could have a major dent. By maybe 30%, we could reduce imports of edible oil in the country. And somebody, one of the guests here today, had mentioned edible oils. So that's an interesting little story about how intercropping, when done synergistically, when done in the right way, and sunflower is really, really good for intercropping because it's a mycorrhizal host species. So we actually inoculated the seeds with a mycorrhizal fungi inoculant that I got from the US. Actually, it's a great experiment, because on that center pivot, it's a 100-acre pivot. We divided it into 50-acre parts, so half and half. One half had the intercrop, the other half did not. And not just in the half with the sunflower did we get that additional sunflower crop, but the sugarcane in that half was much healthier and happier. And the weed pressure was lower as well, because in between the rows of sunflower, where you would otherwise get weeds growing, because they were getting water, they were getting nutrients. Now you had sunflower, which had kept the weed pressure significantly lower, but the sugarcane crop was much healthier and compared to the monocrop. So intercropping can actually lead to better outcomes for your primary crop as well. It's not a compromise. It doesn't need to be a compromise. And that's one of the main lessons we've learned from this. And of course, we do a bunch of everything we try to do in as much of a regenerative system as possible. Different crops are done and managed in different types of regenerative systems, but we make 4 types of composts. That includes a vermicompost as well. The goal is to make fungally dominant and carbon-rich composts because they, give us the best bang for buck or the best return. We are, of course, limited by how much organic biomass we have available because, again, we are in arid conditions. We've planted thousands of trees over the past few years on boundaries. We're planting flowering shrubs. Hedgerows is something I very firmly believe in because we can dramatically reduce the need or even eliminate the need for insecticides. We've done this with our chili crop in Pakistan. Prophylactically, chili farmers, it's a 7-month-long crop. So about every week to 10 days, farmers apply a pesticide to keep certain types of aphids at bay or in control because otherwise they destroy the crop. And knock on wood, last year, which was the first time we grew a sunflower crop, we did not have to apply a single insecticide application because we had enough beneficial insects doing the job for us, right? So you had a bunch of lacewings and ladybugs and just, voraciously consuming any of the bad guys. That's the power of harnessing, the good guys and biology and ecology to do the job for you. And that's, that's the core part of our philosophical makeup. How can we leverage biomimicry and try to glean as much insight from nature, from ecology, from biology to get the outcomes we want, right? We want a high-yielding agriculture because you cannot feed a world that will be 10 billion people. And in Pakistan, we have, again, a high birth rate, and so you need to have the ability to feed people and to clothe people, which all comes from how much you can produce from the land, right? But you have to do that in a way that is sustainable or regenerative, right? That is restoring nature as opposed to depleting and destroying nature. So that's a core goal of ours. How do you create high-yielding agriculture? And to accomplish that, you need to have you need to be deploying as many tools and techniques as possible. And here I'll just end with one last analogy before we can open up for questions. Let's say somebody is in really bad health. They are overweight, they have a cholesterol problem, they have mental health issues that they're also dealing with. Maybe they have some heart problems, a bunch of things have started with they're pre-diabetic or diabetic. So a bunch of problems, their body is basically failing, right? They have issues with their hormones. Everything is out of whack and out of balance. And we know people like this who have actually had radical transformations. They've gone from being pre-diabetic or even diabetic to actually reversing diabetes, reversing heart conditions, reversing their cholesterol problems. And if this person makes one change, right? Let's say they're consuming too much sugar, that's going to have a very positive impact. But, that's just going to be, it'll only take them to a certain level. But let's say they do a complete radical overhaul of their life. They start bringing in exercising under, of course, the tutelage of an expert, so they don't injure themselves. But let's say they start doing cardio, then they start doing weightlifting as well. Both of them have their own benefits. They're 2 separate categories of exercise and the benefits they have for heart, brain, cellular health, et cetera, et cetera. They start, incorporating a lot more vegetables and cruciferous vegetables and things like turmeric and rosemary, which we know have huge positive as epinutrients. They have huge positive ramifications on cellular health. They start meditating, they sleep on time and wake up on time and have the same schedule and getting enough hours. So the more things they stack, when they have meat, they have high quality meat free of antibiotics or pasture raised, so they're doing the right things and they're stacking as many good things together. Their transformation is going to be very quick. Within 2 months, they're going to be a different person. 6 months from now, completely different person, right? Or completely different health markers. That's the case with agriculture as well. The more things we are able to stack, whether it's systemic changes or amendments, the better and quicker the results are, and the better the the return on investment is, the quicker the return on investment is. BCG did a study, I think it was either last year or the year before that. And they effectively said it was based on US farmers who've transitioned to regen ag. And they said that it's a 3-year transition period. And in that 3 years, the farmer actually has to invest a certain amount and he doesn't see the returns until the 4th year or something like that. And therefore, farmers need help with the transition. After that, they're great on their own because the economics works out. But I actually disagree with that thesis. I think that's the case if you just do systemic changes, because systemic changes are slow. But if you pair them with the right amendment changes as well, I think you can get much quicker returns. And therefore, that is the sort of the philosophy or the protocol that I am a major proponent of and advocate of. So that is me, going on and on. I could prattle on for, hours on this stuff, but I'd love to get some questions. Lainey, if you have a question, anybody else.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this. It's like always, I don't know, I just feel like it's so fascinating and educational to hear perspectives on regenerative organic agriculture from people that, like, especially kind of like me, didn't grow up in an agricultural background. I feel like you've absorbed so much from research and reading and practical experience on the farm that it's just like a pleasure to hear you talk about all of your learnings in this kind of organized way. There are some questions that I'll start with from the chat, and then people can raise their hand and bring in more. And I have my own questions, which we'll maybe get to. But let's start with Katie's question about curious to hear where you sell your products. What are your sales channels? And I would add to that kind of, are those people valuing your farm products because they are regenerative organic? And then curious to hear how you're measuring your drawdown impact, i.e. soil carbon / carbon sequestered.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. So firstly, about the products. So far, we are not tapping into any kind of premium for the way we're growing things. But that is about to change. We're working in earnest because we believe that we do deserve, we've put in a lot of hard work. And initially, we had a lot of failures. Like, I didn't touch upon the pain points, but, just understanding the science of compost, it's so complex. We were making really bad hydrophobic, bacterially dominant compost in the beginning, which were not giving us results. So the first year of making compost was quite terrible. And we just thought, we'll just add compost and everything, it's all going to be kumbaya, but it's not. You have to add nutrients, including synthetic ones. If you're not getting enough nitrogen in the system, in these really poor, degraded, sandy soils, in really high pH soils, then you have to have a balance. And the transition does take time, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be regenerative. It doesn't mean it shouldn't take a biology first approach, and it shouldn't be actually actively regenerating, which is what we have been, thankfully doing. In some of our grazing zones, within 1 year, we saw going from 0% organic matter and carbon to about at least 2%. Visually, it's like chocolate brown soil today, where it was just complete beet sand, which is like remarkable. So in terms of selling, so far we haven't been doing that, but for our fruit, we want to start a direct to consumer business starting next year. That's one of the goals. Other things we're exploring is potentially for our, beef, for example, maybe a grass-fed beef jerky business focused on exporting to, neighboring wealthy Gulf countries such as the UAE, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, etc. Because in Pakistan, we don't see a market for that. Jerky is obviously an expensive product. We don't see much of a market, maybe a very niche one. That's something that we're exploring, maybe also doing some freeze-dried fruits. So for our mangoes, that's something we're exploring. We have about 7 or 8 different varieties of mangoes we grow, each of them incredibly delicious. Pakistan and India, not to be biased, have the best, I think, most delicious varieties of mangoes compared to mangoes we get in South America, which lack a lot of flavor. They're a lot more sour as opposed to sweet. These mangoes have, much better aroma profile, much better flavor profile. And the world is missing out, right? So we want to hopefully get them to the world. That's something we're actively exploring as well, but haven't made a decision on. For things like sugarcane, that's going to be going to our mill, but we're in talks with them. So the sugar mill we sell to is Bonsucro certified. So where they do give us, the highest price that they give out to farmers, and we're maybe in conversation with them that if they can maybe increase that by a little bit as well, by a little bit further, that would be amazing. But we get other perks from them. We get, mill mud or press mud, which is in the sugar processing. When you make crystalline sugar, that's one of the sort of waste products, quote unquote, and we use that as one of the ingredients in our composts. And so that's a nice perk that we're able to get from them without charge, So we get sort of in-kind benefit from them, if not cash benefit from them. And those are mostly the things that we're focusing on. Oh yes, for our chilies, we are in talks with a large a Pakistani company that exports a lot of what do they call, like condiments, basically, for cooking. And so in their mixes, they use red chilies. And so because regen ag has become such a buzzword, we're in talks with them to sell to them and get a premium. And so far, they have actually agreed to give us the highest price because we'll be growing the stuff regeneratively. So that's a huge benefit of, again, growing regeneratively, which we're starting to see as the regen movement grows in the world. We're in talks with maybe growing some potatoes for Pepsi. Pepsi has a regen ag, policy for their Lay's business. But ultimately, this is just the beginning. The hope is that once we sort of get a handle on growing potatoes well and growing them regeneratively, of course, that we can start our own maybe potato chips brand. It'll be a niche brand, a premium brand targeting sort of premium audience. But that's also one of the lines we're thinking towards. And to answer the other component of that question, which was what again? Sorry, I forgot.
How are you measuring drawdown impact?
Yes, that's something that unfortunately we are not doing nearly as well as I would like. The hope is that once we improve our balance sheet further by doing this value addition play, where the margins are much higher than when you're selling a commodity, that we can then invest a little bit into hiring somebody to do the impact analysis for us. We are also in talks with a couple of people with the land banking group to measure our positive outcomes and impact via satellite. So they have built a technology and tools to be able to do that via satellite for biodiversity, for tree cover, and for soil carbon. So we're in preliminary chats with them. And then there's another company that's made a soil moisture probe that we're also in talks with to become one of the first users for that probe. And that will be, again, for soil carbon monitoring.
Oh, very cool. I would love to hear more about that and follow up as you explore that, because I think, with Climate Farm School, we've also been talking to a lot of soil science and soil health experts around best measurement tools and like sending your samples to a lab versus probes that can take these measurements. And that's something we're kind of actively exploring on the research and education side as well. Measurement is hard.
Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah. Let's go over to Rebecca for your question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up in the next 3 to 5 minutes just for the sake of time, but I will definitely provide more access points and ways to connect and communicate with Taimur. Let's go to Rebecca's question and then we'll see how far we can get for today.
Yeah, thanks for your patience with us. And it's been so wonderful to hear from you. What I would love to know is, since some of us are not from an ag background also, can you talk a little bit about how many people it takes to make this work and what kinds of skills you've seen really come in handy that you might not have expected?
Yeah, I would say every skill comes in very handy. So the more skills you have. So farming is, it's very complex because you have to have a significant degree of mastery over so many different things. There's the agricultural component and this very newfangled regenerative agronomy that's very cutting edge, right? So there's that component. Then there's just a managerial component. On our farm, we have a farm team. There are agronomists that I hired and trained in a regenerative system, and they had to unlearn this very conventional green revolution paradigm. there's and then of course other, there's labor, all of that stuff. So there's a managerial component, an HR component. There is, then there's a marketing and branding component, especially as we go into value addition. That matters, right? So having that sort of branding or aesthetic sense, that is important. Then there's omni-channel marketing, right? Because if we'll be doing direct-to-consumer fruit boxes for mango and citrus, etc., then we will actually have to do targeted ads on Instagram and Facebook, which is the best way to get people. And we know people in Pakistan have started doing direct-to-consumer fruits very successfully, and none of them are organic or regenerative, by the way, and our fruits are regenerative organic. Our entire farm is not regenerative organic. Some places we are using some synthetics, but all of it is regenerative, but not regenerative organic, but the fruits are regenerative organic. So we have a very unique product, which we hope to sell. So again, there's so many different skills. I would definitely suggest do not do this alone. Ideally, you want to have co-founders. Super important. Farming can be isolating. It's a lot of hard work. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It has a lot of reward, spiritual reward, being in nature, all of that is beautiful, but it is a lot of hard work. So the more people you have that you do this with, also for people who don't have an ag background and want to get into this, you can't do large scale farming generally, right? Unless you have maybe a big financial backer, because it's very expensive land, it's very capital intensive. Land is very expensive. Equipment is very expensive. So the entry point for a lot of people who don't have ag lands is just they'll get an acre or two near cities and just basically do market gardens, right? And you can do market gardens very regeneratively. The best way to start for that is just do home gardening, right? And somebody mentioned that they have an interest in growing their own food. And there's so much you can do and learn in that process. You can try out different seeds. But again, do your research. There are a bunch of YouTube channels out there. You will have to spend I would say, maybe 1,000 hours before you even start doing this. At this point, how we have Gladwell's book that talks about 10,000 hours. At this point, it's been more than 10,000 hours for me. But now I have a certain degree of, relative confidence. Again, there's so much more to learn and do. By no means have I attained mastery. You probably never can do that in a field like agriculture. But, still a much higher level of confidence. Whereas before, it was far, far less. There was so much I just didn't know. So the more you know, the better it is. And so, taking the time out, even if it takes you a year to do a lot of research before you jump in, I think it's totally worth it. And again, using products, super important. And you're super lucky in the US because you have incredible products available, right? Incredible microbial inoculants, incredible biologically derived nutrients and fertilizers, and all of that, are incredible compost if you can't make your own, right? Or compost extracts, right? In the beginning, while you're still not making your own or don't have your own operation set up, incredible biostimulants. All of those really help enhance quality specs, flavor, aroma, taste, sweetness, let's say for fruits, right? Or for vegetables, taste, but also quantity, like yield, because you want to have the maximum yield possible while growing it obviously regeneratively and biologically with the best flavor profile. That's how you hook clients, right? And with an amazing marketing branding strategy, right? So amazing brand name recognition, whether it's like boxes, amazing. So invest in some skills such as how do you acquire customers? So, targeted ads and things like that, right? So again, the more skills you have, and again, the more things you can divide between if it's a group of people doing this, like 2-3 people, right?
Amazing. I love
you.
hearing all of that. Again, great question, Rebecca. Well, I am going to, put our conversation kind of on pause, I will say, for now, because I feel like there's so much more to discuss and share and learn with you, Taimur. And if it's okay with you, I can share your email address with folks in this group to reach out and follow up about anything. And I will also reach out and follow up to see if you happen to be available for dinner in the Hudson Valley in a little over a week's time or so. I look forward to having you back to join our community and keep hearing about how it's going. And thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Of course, yeah, I would I really appreciate the invite, and hopefully I can make it to the Hudson Valley as well. Would love that. Love having everybody here today. Great questions, and I hope that this was helpful. And one more thing, as opposed to email, I would prefer if you can give my number out, if people can reach out to me via WhatsApp, or if you don't use WhatsApp, then iMessage. Wherever I'm in the world, like it's my US number, but I use that for my WhatsApp or iMessage, and I will be available. I'm much better and much more responsive on WhatsApp or text generally compared to email. So please feel free to reach out.
Nice. I will share that along with the recording link to our groups. Thanks for that reminder. And great hearing from you. Great learning with you this evening. And we'll talk more soon. To be continued.
Absolutely. Yes. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thanks
everybody.
for joining, everyone.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.